thank you for joining us for another episode of Two Old Sexperts. Today, Sharon and I talk with you about the use of sexual consent screening tools to support people with disabilities. Today, we talk with you a little bit about use of the VISCAT, as well as the tool used and developed by David Hingsburger in association with YAI.
Maybe you can sort of just talk through what it is and how you use it, because I've only used the YAI tool for sexual consent, and that's the
Yeah,
only one that I've known and used.
and the only one I've used is the VISCAT. So yeah, I find it very helpful, not just for seeing if someone has the ability to give consent, but just to see what their general sexual knowledge is. It's basic sexual knowledge because it asks a lot of questions and it sets up scenarios and asks, what would you do if? VISCAT actually stands for the Verbal Informed Sexual Consent Assessment Tool. And it's used by, they say, by clinical staff to look at the capacity for an individual to give informed consent. And it is broken into sections, which I like very much. So one is sort of the general sexual history. And, you just get the basic information about the individual, name and, their date of birth and their gender and, just kind of the basic stuff. And then how long I've worked, if they're in your group sessions or individual sections, what's your relationship with them? And then some examples, which I really like too. Like one of the examples they give is about 3 months ago, a client was heard giving a correct description of sexual intercourse in an informal conversation with another client. And then another one would be during group, I heard the client state his or her interest in learning about dating. So, you want to see where they're coming from and how much information they have and what their knowledge of sexuality might be. And then what are their attitudes? What do they think? What do they feel about sexual matters? The client has a positive feelings about people who use condoms, for example, or the client has expressed negative feelings about people who, and they quote here, play with themselves or masturbate. So they want to know what attitudes somebody has. And then sexual behaviors, for example, the person has not been observed engaging in any sexual activity or expressing any desire, so they don't seem to be interested at all. And then again, using examples, they want to know what kinds of things have been reported by members of the family or staff or friends or employees regarding their client's knowledge. So they'll, for instance, the client's guardian or person reports that they have participated in a few HIV prevention classes. So, what knowledge do they have? Have they had a class or a discussion with family or friends or or staff? Or another example is the person's sister reports that the brother or sister knows information about dating and has an occasional girlfriend or boyfriend. So you're just gaining some good background information on them. And then their feelings and attitudes. Like the example again that they give is that the person at the day program reports that the person always seems uncomfortable when someone says the word sex, which of course is not rare with someone that has a history of abuse and trauma.
Right.
Sexual behaviors. The guardian reports to their knowledge, or the person that supports them, the client has not had sexual intercourse, but that he or she does masturbate and has done some sexual kissing or touching with a partner. So they are active and seem to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And then there's a last question in that section, well, second to last, actually. What are some things two people can do together sexually? And a few sexual behaviors are listed, and there's a whole list here. And they ask if you can do that, and is it okay to do it or not? So one is kiss someone on the mouth, use their hands to touch or feel the other person's body, such as their penis, scrotum, vulva, vagina, clitoris, or breasts. Touch these places on their own body while another person is watching. Use their mouths on these places on each other's bodies, also called oral sex. Have vaginal sex, a man's penis in a woman's vagina. Have anal sex, a man's penis in another person's anus, or any other kind of activity. So that is really one of the things that I find is that's one of the most discussions. You get a lot of, you can see the comfort or discomfort when you're talking about that. And the last one in the category is, what is dating and what is a relationship? What does that actually mean? And what you're hoping to see is dating is when two people who like each other spend time together in public or private and enjoy being with each other. They can be more than friends, that maybe they like to go out together. And sometimes when you're dating, you like to kiss and hug and have sex. They might have a relationship and date no one else, just so it's an exclusive relationship. May not be, but it may be. People who are in a relationship are honest with each other, so they tell each other if they're seeing anyone else or not. And they show respect for each other and caring for each other. And sometimes people really want to live together, and so that may be part of what you're working with them to help them to move there. And then there's the next section is current sociosexual issues. And the question is that you will discuss is, who is the most important people, who are the most important people in your life? Is dating something you'd like to do? And sometimes they'll say, my parents or my staff, or they'll say, my best friend or my girlfriend, and that's important too. And is dating something you want to do? Sometimes people aren't interested and they say no. The second question is, have you had sex within the past year? And then explain what sex might mean. Ask them what exactly. I always think the question, tell me more, is really so important when you're dealing with this stuff. So try to find out if they have, because having sex might mean to them vaginal penile intercourse when it can be so many things.
Right.
And we know, from fairly recent history that people who were only having oral sex often didn't think they were having sex at all, and yet they were getting sexually transmitted infections. So
Right.
we have to be about that. If you had a problem with someone and someone was hurting you, what would you do? If someone was making you do something that you didn't want to do, you were uncomfortable, or they were physically hurting you, what would you do? Can you give an example of something someone close to you has done to hurt you, and how did you handle that? So there's a scenario. If someone did you tell anyone? Did you just not try not to be around them anymore, or are you still are they still in your life? Are they still hurting you? You have to try to find that out. Give an example of something you can do with a date in private that you cannot do in public. That's always it's always a good one. And who do you feel is in charge of making decisions in your life? And that for me is a really big one, because often it's my staff or my parents, but very often, I mean, what we want to get to is I might need some help, but I'm in charge of what I do, whether it's good or bad, and I want to have a good full life.
Yeah, and in group
So
yesterday, you even heard, and I corrected them, where they were saying the staff person who works with them, well, you're my boss. I feel like you're
that's
my
right.
boss. And I'm
Yeah.
mortified when I hear
I,
that
I
because
couldn't see your face, but I was sure you were. I feel like you're my boss. Yeah,
mm,
because there's there's some dependency, and you're helping them, and you're doing things to be supportive, and it always and I had an example that I've used before, but I was working with a woman, and I used these little boxes that I should finish this maybe and then talk about. But anyway, they're three little boxes, and one has the names of people, another has places, and another has actions. And you flip them like dice, and then you have a scenario. And it could be, my brother wants to hold my hand in the park, and then well, what do you think about that? And they might say no way, but you say, well, why? Maybe it's rocky, or they want to help you over, or I don't know, I don't, but that's really important. And I was working with a woman, and I met her weekly in her bedroom. She had one wall was a desk and places to sit, and we sat there, and I flipped these things, and what came up was Sharon, because if I'm working directly with the person, my name is on the cube. Sharon asked me to take my clothes off in my bedroom. And she said, oh, that's a hard one. And it was just kind of like, oh, after meeting with her for a couple of months, I was kind of shocked. And I just simply said, well, tell me about that. Why? And she said, because I trust you. And that's, of course, one of the big things around people we work with that are maybe dependent or very trusting of all of us that are supporting them. And that's where a lot of abuse happens, or another person that they trust.
It's
You know,
scary.
it's very scary. I'm your friend. I'd never hurt you. Let's just do this little thing. It'll be our secret. But anyway, I just had to throw that one in there. Now, the last one is it's sort of a checklist that demonstrates the person can tell that they're aware of the nature of the sexual acts, and they have an ability to make a choice to engage or abstain from sexual contact. So it will be clear after we've done all of these things that they will. And then there's a scenario, and this particular one is: imagine you're in a private place like your bedroom with someone you like a lot. You and this person have kissed, hugged, and touched each other's bodies before. Now this person unzips their pants and asks you to put their hand inside. What do you think this person is asking to do? What would you do? Again, they're in a private place in like a bedroom. And what would you do? You've been active with this person in the past. And, if they say, I would like to, but, are there other people in the house, or, is it time for dinner or whatever? I mean, it's a discussion, and just to find out, yes, that would be fine. If you're able to, if the other person is willing to do that, and you've been involved with each other before. Part of the problem is if so few that do sexual consent, that often people have not had anything like this done, but they're just two people that are in a relationship and care about each other. So, I mean, that's really an important one. And there's a little box that you can check, and it says the client has difficulty. The word client is annoying to me. But the person has difficulty understanding the scenario after you've repeated it. So they're not sure. You want to be sure that they know what you're talking about. And also, are they aware of the sexual nature of the act? Yes or no? And are they aware that they can make a decision about whether or not to engage? So you can say, no, I don't feel like it right now, or no, or whatever it might be. I don't, so you check the boxes here. And through each of these, I won't go on forever, but under each of these, there are boxes that they understand what the scenario, and then there are questions: do they understand, yes or no? So the second scenario is: imagine you're sitting in the living room with several friends. A person you don't know well sits next to you and kisses you on the mouth. You don't know this person very well, and you're a little uncomfortable. What's going on with the person, and what would you do? So do they understand what you're asking them there? And then are they, aware that it's a sexual act, yes or no? And they're aware that they can say, knock it off, yes or no, leave me alone.
Or keep
So
going.
yeah, or keep at it. Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, in a room with several friends, that would be the indicator. The next one is: suppose you like someone a lot, you're alone with them, and you touch their penis or vulva. They say no, and they stop you. What's going on with this? What would you do? I mean, that's obviously a very important one, because just because you're having a good time doesn't mean the other person is.
Yeah.
So are you sensitive to the other person, and and do you stop, and how do you handle that? So they're aware that what they're doing is a sexual act, and they're aware that the other client can make a decision. The other person can make a decision that they don't want to, whether you do or not. It's if you both aren't on the same page, then it's not okay. And that they're aware that they need to stop the behavior, and it's the yes or no thing. And then there's a summary section where you add up all kinds of at the bottom of that. Now the next section is that the person demonstrates an understanding of how to prevent unwanted pregnancies and sexually transmitted infections. And these are just yes or no questions. A man can wear a condom. A woman can use a method of contraception or birth control. They can fool around or touch each other sexually, but not put the penis in the vagina. They could decide not to have sexual intercourse. They could masturbate by themselves. They could masturbate together. There's nothing the couple could do to avoid pregnancy. Yes or no? And then are there other ways a couple can avoid pregnancy? So, there's just some areas where they can talk about that. Two people might have some sexual behaviors with each other. like sexual intercourse, oral sex, anal sex. When they do these, what one person has an infection, is it possible for the other person to get that infection? So just because you're not having it, it's a certain kind of it's what we talked about before that you
Yeah,
can, it
there's
can
still
receive.
risk.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of people, with or without disabilities don't, well, hopefully they get it now, but a lot of people don't. When they have these behaviors, if one person has an infection, it is possible. It's reaffirming that. So, and then you go all the way down to all those things we just talked about. There are yes or no answers. The last one is, let's see where we are. The client demonstrates the need to restrict sexual behavior to certain times and places. Like, is it okay to have sex, to kiss someone with your tongue when you're at work, in a classroom, in a restaurant, in a living room with lots of people, in a living room where no one's home, in your bedroom, on the bus, somewhere where you're alone with your partner? Just again, it's the public and private. And are they aware of what's okay and what's not? Imagine you want to have sexual intercourse with someone you like a lot. Is it okay to do this when you're in the bathroom at school, work, or in the community? It's a big one. In the park, in your bedroom with the door closed, during dinner time, or in your bedroom? And that's an interesting one, because I remember this one in particular when I said in the bedroom with your door closed during dinner time, and the gentleman said, "No way, I'm not missing dinner." Okay, then.
That's it, man.
Yeah, there are priorities. I always remember that guy. He was pretty funny. And is it okay to hug a friend, a stranger, a sweetheart, someone you just met? So it's looking at boundaries, and then there's the area on the law, what's legal and illegal. I had a funny one in this category too. Basically, it's that you want to be sure the person's aware. So some sexual behaviors against the law, and a person who does one of these behaviors can be arrested. Do you know any sexual behaviors that are against the law? There's a little guide, and then there's a question and answer. And again, the yes, no, not sure. You're on a bus and a man takes out his penis to show it to other people. Is this man's behavior against the law? And the responses are yes, no, or not sure. They want to know that they know that yes, indeed, they can. You and your partner decide to have sex on the floor of your bedroom with the door closed. Is this against the law? And it's interesting because some people say yes, but of course it is. It's
That same question is on the YAA tool and YAI tool, sorry.
yeah,
And that always seems to get people. They look at me like I have horns growing out of my head. Like, are you serious?
yeah, on the floor. Yeah, it is interesting. Imagine someone makes you do something sexual that you don't want to do. Is that against the law? And of course it is. Imagine you want to have want to do something sexual with a person you really like. The person says, "Not now." Do you do it anyway? And is this against the law? So, I mean, again, it's respecting the other person and agreeing that you're both on the same page. Adults can have sex with other adults. Can an adult have sex with a child? And I have a follow up to this, which is, what's the difference between an adult and a child? But that's not included in here. But I do include it. Is it against the law to pay money for someone to have sex with? This is the one that was funny, because of course it is. But one person that I was working with said, "Not in Nevada." I thought that was hilarious. You look like you wanted to go to Nevada.
Well, that's what I tell people. If you can save enough money to get to Nevada, have at it.
Yeah, but I mean, the discussion around them is really interesting. Is it against the law to watch pornography? Well, no, but is it? I mean, it doesn't say it here, but I would add adult or child, because of course it is illegal. And as we know, there are many people in jail because of child pornography who are on the spectrum. That's a shame. You're in an elevator and see a person rubbing their private parts. Is this against the law? Well, it is. I mean, like if they have jock itch and they just can quickly scratch or something, that's different than standing there rubbing their penis. That's very different. So then you add up all these. The last, I believe it's the last one here. The client demonstrates the ability to identify harmful situations and avoid being exploited or harmed. So let me see. Two people have decided to go shopping. One was looking forward to go doing this, like all week. They were looking forward to going shopping with their friend. Before they were leaving, the one told the other, I don't have any money, and I won't go unless you give me $10. So would you go? And Sometimes someone would say, well, I feel bad you don't have any money, alone I mean, but it's the discussion that you're looking for here. But if the person is simply saying, no, I'm not going unless you give me $10, I mean, and you have to kind of break that down and see what we're talking about here. Two people go out together. Sometimes they have arguments. When couples argue, which of the following things are okay to do? What would you do? Call the other person a mean name, find someone to help the argument from getting out of hand, hit the other, but not too hard. So that's a hard one because I don't find any of those answers particularly
Right?
helpful. Yeah. I mean, you could find someone to help the argument from getting out of hand, but you can't go through life like that. You
No.
have to have your own control. So and I always add that part of the discussion because I think that's the one that I struggle with a little bit. But you can kind of scooch around it so they understand what you're saying. But how would they handle it if they live in a group home or they're in a day program or whatever? Well, they're going out, but I mean, if you were there, and they might say, Sean, like help us out here. And that's a little bit different. But anyway, you want to know that they're not going to call them a mean name or hit them. That wouldn't work. You could just stop talking, you don't want to yell and scream, all that stuff, but you get to how they would handle it. And that's how do all of us handle it. Another one, suppose you have been having sex with someone for a couple of months. One night the person wants to have sex with you, but you don't feel like it, and you tell them no. The person continues to have sex with you, even when you told them to stop, even when you start to cry. You see the person later the next day, what would you say or do? Do you talk to them? Are you mad at them, or what do you do? 2 nights later, the person asks you to come over again, and they want to come and see you again. What would you do? Obviously, the point here is that they are being abused, and the person is not respecting them. And what you want to get to is that this person is someone that's supposed to care about you, and that's not exactly what's happening here. But you want to be sure that they understand that. Last part here is, and I like this part of it because after you add all this up, you end up with scores, under, do they need education? Do they need counseling? Do they need skills training? Do they need program planning? Like, what are the things that they need? And then after you do all of that, and there's 5 categories there. They're aware of the nature of sexual acts and the ability to choose to engage or abstain. An understanding of how to prevent pregnancies and STIs, understanding the need to restrict sexual behavior to certain places and times, understanding that sexual behaviors are illegal in this state, certain behaviors are, the ability to identify harmful situations and avoid being exploited or harmed. And then the final thing is that making a decision that 1 out of 4, the client fulfills the requirements. It just sounds like we're talking about not a person, the way that some of these things are worded. Fulfills the requirements of the principles and can give verbal consent for sexual contact. 1, the client is able to give verbal consent and would benefit from services indicated below, as in education, counseling, skill building, or program planning. The client cannot give verbal informed consent at this time. And the 4th one is the client's ability to provide verbal consent is vague and could not be determined by this assessment. So there's 4 categories. One is like, you're good to go. Another is, we need to support you in some other ways. You need a little more education around, STIs, or, you need some counseling around, if you've been abused in the past, you might have some gray areas about someone putting pressure on you. And then you provide that. And so they can reach the point where they don't need any more. Well, we all need ongoing education, but they're safe. And so anyway, that's the end, that you add it all up. And what you say is this person clearly understands and has all the information, or they're quite capable, but they need this. And the 3rd category, just not sure. They need more education. They need more opportunities to practice what they know. And the last one is the person just doesn't understand what we're talking about.
There are many, it's almost strange how many parallels there are between the VISCAT and the YAI tool that David Hingsburger and the group that he worked with had created. And I don't know which came first, it's like, the chicken or the egg, but Some
Yeah.
of the questions are exactly the same, but looking at the 5 areas of sexual consent, whether you're using the VISCAT or the YAI tool, they're exactly the same. And I think the categorical information YAI uses no knowledge, limited knowledge, or sufficient knowledge. But the VISCAT seems to provide more concrete questions, and you can provide more of a yes no answer, where the YAI tool is more open-ended, and you're literally recording the precise thing that the person says. And then you're making a determination from there whether they fit in no knowledge, limited knowledge, or sufficient knowledge. And I struggled with that. And I actually modified the tool a little bit and put numbers in the categories based on answers so that I could numerically look at how I would determine whether or not a person had no knowledge, sufficient knowledge, or limited knowledge.
Well, I do an additional thing too, and I also have line drawings of an adult male and adult female and children. And I ask the difference, what are the differences in them? And then I point to different body parts and ask, what is this body part? And what is it called? And what does it do? And I get very specific with that, like a penis, it's called a penis, but sometimes they'll use a slang word,
Mm.
which I'm not comfortable with, as I've said before. But I say, yes, that's one word. But there's another word, and it's called penis. And if you hurt yourself or you need something or you're concerned, this is the word that you should use. And what does it do? They'll say it pees. And I say, yep, that's right. And anything else? And then they'll get giggling or whatever. But then somebody will say, well, it's for sex. Yep, that's right. And and I do the same thing with the vagina or the chest and the breast and the anus and who has what and what do they do? What do these body parts do? I just think it's important to get out of your own way and talk about those specific things because I mean I have so many people that I think about that were shamed as kids and so they're embarrassed and uncomfortable and they even hurt themselves sometimes touching their body parts and that's a bad thing. So I talk about, and I also talk about LGBT. If you feel romantic about another person that you would like to hold them or hug them, would that be a boy or a girl, a man or a woman? And and doesn't matter. Just can you tell me that? And sometimes they'll tell me, and they haven't told anybody else. But that's important, to know who they are and what supports they need. So I always include those things in addition. And the other thing that I always do is ask the person to explain to me what we just talked about. Let them teach me. Now, what I just told you, you tell me that back. And because if they don't understand, if they're just listening and they don't really get it, then you need to know that they really did.
And that's my
Yeah.
other question for you, because we have a lot of people that we support who they seem like they do understand things like at the face value, but I know there's one person in particular that's coming into my mind. We've tried to do this a sexual consent screening on her numerous times, and she's just not getting it. I mean, she will say, I don't understand like what we're even asking. And no matter how many ways you try to rephrase it or ask the question, she can't get through the screening. And then people are kind of looking at us as the gatekeepers to whether or not a person can have sex. And I get stuck between a rock and a hard place. I don't feel like she can give consent.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what do you do in situations like that?
Well, I mean that is really interesting. I mean, if and the other, I guess, another piece of that is you can't lock somebody in the room and say no, you can't. I mean,
Right.
part of getting consent is to keep them safe, help them to have healthy, normal relationships. But I mean, if a person can't answer all the questions and then they go out somewhere alone, I mean, they're in danger. They really are. And I mean, I worked with a couple that they ended up getting married, which is really nice. But she had an incredible history of abuse as a young person. She had a child at 14, but she'd been tied up and I mean raped. It was really bad, and I knew that, but he didn't know that. She hadn't told him. So I had both their records and everything, and I asked her that the next time we met, would it be all right to tell him about her history? And she said yes. so the three of us were together, and we talked about that. And the reason that was important was they clearly loved each other. I mean, you could see it. They were delightful to be around. But I said, what could happen? And they hadn't had intimacy. They hadn't had sexual intimacy at this point, but they both lived in group homes, and they were working out a way that they could have time alone. And I said, you really love each other and you want to be together sexually. But what could happen is when he touches your body in a certain way, in a certain place, your body could remember that pain and trauma that you had when you were 13 years old, and you could get really scared. And he said, I would never hurt her. And I said, I know you wouldn't. And she knows you wouldn't. But her little girl body, she remembered, but talking about it, she said, you never thought about that. And but that was a really monumental thing, because she could have just smacked him or started to cry or whatever. And so I think you really need to talk about all that stuff in the past. And but she hadn't told him, she never told him that. And I was reminded about that by the young woman, that the person that you said, just doesn't seem to get it, because I guess it was such a shameful for her. I mean, there was no reason for her to be shamed. She was forced, but she just didn't want anybody to know that. She told me, but she needed to tell her partner as well. So
Yeah, it's so hard because, like this one in particular, she's guy crazy, and she's always been sort of boy crazy. I had her when she was young. I mean, she was a teenager when I had her. She's probably pushing 40 now, and not much has changed in terms of chasing guys, but still just, very apprehensive about the idea of sex too. So even when you try to describe it and talk about, because they see things on television and in movies
yeah,
too, just, oh no, ooh no. And I worry about her. I worry that she's going to just easily go along with things and get hurt. And I don't want her to get hurt.
do you know if she had early trauma, like really early, like as even a toddler or a very young child?
Not sexual, but there was a lot of abuse and neglect, and she wound up living with her grandparents then. She was raised by her grandparents from an
Yeah.
early age.
Yeah, I find often that people are who had early stuff, sometimes it's even pre-verbal stuff, but there's a pleasurable feeling related to sex. I mean, even though someone who, is doing something sexual to a 2-year-old, that's illegal and immoral. But if it feels good, the child they don't get that. They don't have the thought processes to get past that, but it stays with them, and it really confuses things, because they want to recreate that feeling somewhere in their, like the
Mhm.
brain of the iguana back there, and they're doing things that are harmful, and they don't get why. And I did have someone like that at one point, and we did had someone do work with EMDR. That you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. It was just amazing that this young person could finally make the connection between what he was doing and what had happened to him as a young person. So that was helpful. A friend who was very successful woman, she was a very dear friend of mine, and her father died when she was 2, and her mother took her brother, who was 4, and went as a housekeeper somewhere, and my friend went into foster care and had a lot of abuse, a lot of terrible things happened to her. And then at some point, the mom came back, and they moved in with another relative. And then her mother died. So she had years that were not there. They were just not there. And it always bothered her, because she knew that things had happened that shouldn't have. And she did EMDR, and it was incredible. It was just absolutely incredible what she was relieved of, that she said, I feel like I can breathe again. But
Yeah, it's pretty amazing stuff to see how, they can tap into the parts of the brain that, we wouldn't even recognize something existed.
exactly.
It's
Yeah.
it's really quite amazing.
Yeah.
And we don't have enough practitioners who are doing that. So
No.
that's definitely something that to be looked at. But going back to the sexual consent stuff, I don't give everyone a screening. I mean, you can pretty much tell just through conversations with people sometimes whether or not they have the knowledge in these areas. And we kind of have to fine tune then, just working on the next step too. I do a lot of practicing to make sure people understand condom use. I've seen all kinds of things where they had no
Too.
idea how to even open a package, even just with dexterity issues they had to. So we have to, open the floodgates for talking about and practicing the next step too, because it's scary to think about. Sex is a big
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah. I heard you mention something once that, when you're teaching people how to use a condom, don't use a banana, use a dildo. That this looks like the real thing, which is so important. But I do know a situation where they were teaching with a banana, and this couple went and got together in a hotel room or wherever, motel, I think, and they took a banana and a condom with them and put the condom on the banana and
Oh
left
my
it on
God.
top of his chest and had sex, had unprotected sex. Oh my God. So you really have to be specific, no matter how uncomfortable we are. I mean, that's somebody's life we're talking about.
And you know what?
Yeah.
People do have children too. And I've worked with a lot of people who decide they want to have children. And that's been a real taboo subject too, that I think we're only just starting to address is people with disabilities having and raising children. And I will tell you, I have seen people with disabilities raise children who are far better than the neurotypical counterpart parents that I've been exposed to.
Yeah.
It can be
Yeah.
done. And I do
Yes.
parenting assessments in Allegheny County I haven't done one in a while, but it's specifically assessing the skills and knowledge of a parent with a disability. Because again, it's the goal is not to rip their children from them. The goal is to look at what additional education and support may they need in order to not just safely support and raise a child, but provide enrichment and enhancement to the child's life too. And I've seen amazing things happen with that. There are
Yeah.
some times, though, where it's just not, it's a major safety issue for the child. And, they do
Right.
have to be removed. But I think we need to be talking about this. And it's not just about sexual consent, but it's about what happens after people become sexually active and they want to live the life that everybody else wants to live too.
Yeah, this was a few years ago. There was a woman in Philadelphia, and I think she's an attorney. I'm not sure, but I think so. And her mother had an intellectual disability. And she was interviewed, and she said it was the best mother I could ever have had.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's you can't judge. It's a big, wide palette. And the other thing, and we've talked about this before, is all agencies are supposed to have, a policy on sexuality, not the consent to have sex, the capacity for measuring it. But many don't have policy, just general policies on sexuality, like, how do you help people get together? What information are you giving them about their bodies? And just the basic sort of stuff. They just don't have it. And if they don't have that, then they're certainly not going to have this. And they're people, human beings like us that are not having full lives because we're not helping them to get there.
Talking with Nancy 2 weeks
Yeah,
ago, and she
right.
had mentioned, having the person-centered plan really address this component
Yep.
too. And I thought it's a great idea. But then I kind of chuckled to myself thinking about that because for all of us just living our lives, no one has to come with really a diagram to
Right.
talk through the most natural parts of life too.
Yeah.
But we do have to amplify this in order to, one, provide the opportunity, and two, provide the education to see that people have the opportunity and they're able to safely navigate it too.
And counseling, one of my pet peeves is that two people are found together doing something sexual. And of course it has to be reported, and I get that. But the way it's reported, not always, but often the way that it's investigated, you end up with a victim and an offender when they're just trying to figure it out. And I've seen it countless times over the years. And that's just an absolute shame to me that happens. Instead of dealing with things that are uncomfortable for us, we just ignore them. And then these people who are trying to have a relationship punished for doing what we all have done in our lives. And
But like personal care homes and nursing homes, for example, when with dementia, people can
exactly.
become very different, and that can include sexualized behaviors. But I'm
Yeah,
not sure how they handle that because this kind of stuff happens all the time in those settings too. But do we
exactly.
quickly send an investigator in and separate people and move a person the nursing home or what? I don't think we do.
No, I don't think so either. And that happens so often, unfortunately, because I mean, I know a woman whose husband is in a nursing home and he doesn't recognize her anymore, and he's has a girlfriend in the nursing home, and
Mhm.
he doesn't know that. And I think the rate of sexually transmitted infections is going up in nursing homes
It
as
is.
well.
Yes.
Yeah, that is really difficult because even if you spend time and explain, they may not remember what you've told them because of the capacity. I just think staff need to be more diligent about it and have all kinds of activities for them to do. And I don't know. I mean, if someone was capable of making the decision, then whatever, that's fine. You have two elderly people and they like each other and they want to sleep in the same room. That's But it gets complicated. It clearly does when you talk about that population because you might have spouses and it's just they don't remember. They can't remember. The older I get, the more I think, the remembering thing is not, it's not funny.
I think it's just our reaction to sexual behavior in what I would consider institutional settings, whether that's group homes, because that's still sort of an institutional setting, group home is, or something like a personal care home or a nursing home.
Yeah,
It's just you have fewer numbers in a group home than you do in a personal care home.
that's absolutely true. And you have the same thing in prisons, I mean, any place where people are contained, you're going to have sexual issues, I mean, prisons probably is not a good example, but I
But
mean, I
it's
worked at,
true though. Yeah. I mean, I've worked
oh,
with people who have
absolutely.
come out of prison and they say, I had sex with this guy. Does that make me gay? I said, no, that's called institutional sexuality,
That's
where
right.
you're contained and you're a sexual being with hormones. So you do what you
Exactly.
have to do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole other issue too. People, males who have been sexually molested by a male when they were young. And again, if it becomes pleasurable and the person's kind to them and good to them and gives them a winter jacket when it's cold and and it's a relationship, but it's an abuse. The man grows older and becomes an adult and maybe gets married and says, I think I'm gay. Well, how, you think you are because you consented to that, but are you or are you not? You have to talk about that. You just can't say, well, I don't know, because you're suffering, you're really emotionally suffering about that, having an impact on the relationship.
Yeah. So I think to kind of bring it full circle, I think we do need to be taking a look at these components, so the five areas of sexual consent. And I'm not saying sit down and do a formal, screening on everyone, but look at those areas because that's the information contained within those areas that the people we support absolutely need to have access to that information. So
Right.
start providing it. And even if you don't have a formal policy in place wherever you work, you can start chipping away at providing some of this information to folks too.
Yeah, and those the three little boxes that I talk about. I mean, you can design them. When you talk about on the one box are names of people, and another one are places, another are sexual activities. You can create a whole incredible scenario, and get a wonderful discussion going with a small group of people. I use them when I'm doing for adults with intellectual disability and autism around sexuality. Some of the discussions are fantastic.
I
Well,
love
that
the
would be,
idea.
it really is, but it really, they don't just say, no way. Well, yeah, they'll say, no way. And I'll say, well, okay, but, what would you do if this happened? What would you tell me to do if I was in that situation? And, and then they think, well, I wouldn't want you to get hurt. Okay, well, tell me what you would do then.
And see, that's what I like
Yeah,
about you, Sharon. You've always been that person who says, tell me more. or tell me what you would do. You don't plant information in people's head, or you don't become their mouthpiece. You try to pull information from them to make sure that they understand too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, like the young woman that's when I flipped the boxes, when she said that's a hard one. Sharon wants me, whatever. Yeah, I could have said, no, that wouldn't be okay. That's silly. Why would you do that? Well,
A lot of people
absolutely, yeah,
respond that way though. Why? That's
I
silly. Oh,
know.
come on, you know the answer. And that's a great
Yeah,
way to shut people down too.
yeah, it is. It really is. Yeah, I like the discussion. And when I'm in classes, I mean, it's just so much fun because people are getting together and you're talking about something that's makes them laugh and giggle, but at the same time, it's a really important part of their lives. And some of the discussions have just been fabulous, and it's good. That's the reward.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Two Old Sexperts. We hope you'll tune in for the next episode coming soon.